After the full-on assault of Led Zeppelin II, the band decided to take a step back and work through a milder approach for their third album. And this folk stuff kicks ass. It's always really during the in-between phases of bands that we get some of their most experimental and creative stuff, and that's kind of where we find Led Zeppelin on this one. We talked last week about the Police going through the same thing on Regatta de Blanc, but this is their transition period, transitioning into a more folk and acoustic-based sound, a sound that we heard plenty of on their subsequent album, Led Zeppelin IV, an album that's not only my favorite Zeppelin album, but one of my favorites of all time.
This album really is that big step towards Zeppelin IV. Zeppelin III does have more of the folky, acoustic, fantastic work from Jimi, of course, and Robert Plant peaks with his vocals that shouldn't be humanly possible. An album that I don't really hear too many people talk about besides, but it's one that is very important to their discography.
I think they struck a much better balance between their two sounds on Zeppelin IV, but it's still impressive to hear how well-rounded this one is given their reliance on that new sound. Without further bovine excrement, I'm Darius King.
I'm Metalhead.
This is the Immigrant Song. Kind of revealing my age a little bit. I'll never forget the first time I heard the song when I was 4 years old, and of course, the legendary School of Rock. And not being able to comprehend how anyone could make that noise with their voice. I probably confused a lot of people in one of our ancient Zeppelin reviews when I said Robert Plant was underrated, and I'm gonna double down on that because he's top 2 and he's not 2. Of course, there are many outstanding singers that bring their own personality and twists, like, you know, an Ozzy Osbourne or something like that, but in terms of raw, objective vocal talent, there's no one better. The only one who I can think of right now that comes close is Dio.
Especially in 1970, they didn't have a lot of auto-tune and make you sound like Robert Plant. Just belting in the studio and hitting the mountaintop.
Well, Misty Mountain Hop, Led Zeppelin.
It delivers so well on what they're really trying to give you.
It is one of the most hard-hitting rhythms in hard rock, and it certainly borders on heavy metal. Everyone is so tight together. Bonham following along with the snare and the kick. John Paul Jones with that tasty ascending arpeggio. Robert with the ooze, adding even more tension to the outro that just stops on a dime. A short hit and run that means so much to me personally as one of the first hard rock songs that I remember hearing and that really stuck with me for a lifetime. And this is probably my favorite Zeppelin song of all time. That only means a 10 out of 10.
Oh, shit. This is one that you can really show anybody getting into Zeppelin. This one going on my playlist as it's always been for years.
The intro of the new folk-heavy Led Zeppelin started off with one of Jimi's most infectious riffs. But what catches my attention is how dramatically John Paul Jones' strings transform the entire song. You have these two totally different styles that fit together like puzzle pieces, with John Paul Jones giving off this dark, haunting vibe, while somehow fitting with Jimi's twangy, folksy guitar like a puzzle piece.
Well, that's another thing about Jimi Hendrix, Jimi Page. I think I did say Jimi Hendrix.
That's
Jesus
awesome.
Christ. His electric guitar work is phenomenal, but I always felt like he shined through more in his acoustic guitar work. That's the thing about John Paul Jones too. He's not just the bass player. He does the strings. He puts in all these other aspects. He's so underrated.
Speaking of contrasting styles, even Robert Plant brings that same energy from Immigrant Song over to this one, totally contrasting the other two sounds, but still somehow making the song even better. Jimi Page is like hanging out with the guys from the gas station, sitting on the porch from the SpongeBob movie, playing this like twangy acoustic stuff, and then you got John Paul Jones doing some Nosferatu horror movie shit. Robert Plant is singing Immigrant Song off over here, and you think they clash together, but somehow it fits with the entire song. It's not quite the anthem Immigrant Song was, but the composition itself is so masterful and mesmerizing to listen to on just that point alone, especially the transition into the subsequent track. So this one's going on my playlist.
Metalhead seal of approval.
The twangy bounciness continues, this time with a little bit more cocaine.
This one doesn't really have a lot going on for it. It's concrete 70s classic formula.
Yeah, I agree. Once you heard the first 30 seconds, you kind of heard the rest of the song. But at the same time, this is a song that kind of invented Greta Van Fleet's entire career. Celebration Day is literally highway tune. I like the mix of that bluesy feel with John Paul Jones' soul organ, and these softer undertones add a really nice backbone to the crescendos by each individual band members as separate parts, and especially the ones where the whole band does it.
John Bonham is excellent. Is
I'm aware.
The ultimate backbone for this song. He keeps it alive. He keeps the listener in tune with it, while everybody else just has an absolute fantastic jam sesh. This is a song that I feel is a definition of Led Zeppelin, and I feel like it really speaks for them as a band.
I really enjoyed Page's solo spot. It perfectly blends the big bends together along with the pentatonic shreds and the slower parts as well. Possibly Plant's best performance on the record. He delivers the emotion the song calls for while taking it from 0 to 100 throughout. And just a reminder, this is also an album that has Immigrant Song on it, so that's really saying something. I'd give this one...
JK, that shit is going straight to the playlist.
This one is on my playlist.
Nice return to their earlier roots we heard in their first two albums. Shades of Good Times, Bad Times here.
My favorite Led Zeppelin song.
That's a great one.
It's got a really kick-ass solid riff and has excellent structure. Not better than Since I've Been Loving You, but it's a good continuation of the energy they give. And again, Bonham just drives it.
Yeah, he turns that hi-hat into a metronome while he molests the rest of the kit. I love the pairing of the two tones here. Jimmy's tone and JPJ with that rumbling bass has this really deep, heavy sound. Plant saying, "Ooh yeah," for the 69,000th time gets a little bit tiring, but I love the return to the classic sound to keep the track list fresh. So I give this one the Darius King seal of approval.
This gets the Metalhead seal of approval.
Probably least favorite.
Yeah,
Starts in a nice
some...
direction with Plant crooning over that distant acoustic, and then it just gets stuck in this rut where they're jamming with the guys at the gas station, and Plant gets a little high on his own fumes and starts to sound like he's doing a Cornholio impression.
And also slightly annoying.
Yeah. Why?
Why?
Why? One of the richest sounding guitar melodies on this whole album. Much smoother tone overall, delivers this really dreamy and nostalgic vibe.
Robert Plant being an excellent vocalist, I feel like he shines more in the higher range. So for Tangerine, it's still a good performance from him, but I feel like it seems like he's not really in his pocket as much.
I have to go back and listen to that one because I feel like Robert Plant shines in any range. That's why I think he's one of the best singers, like the best singer of all time, because he's so versatile and so dynamic. He has like the range of Geddy Lee, but without any of the like squawkiness that he gets a lot of criticism for. I love Geddy as a vocalist, but he's like a cleaned up version of Geddy.
He is.
Jimmy Page flexes his vocals, harmonizing with Plant nicely. Maybe that was your problem. Maybe you weren't a big fan of Jimmy's vocals.
Maybe not.
One of the more successful experiments with their new sound on this album. So this one is going on my playlist.
Always been on my playlist and always will be.
Isn't that a Zeppelin song too? It's like what is and
what is and what should have.
That's right, yes. That's the way. I like it.
Except I don't like it.
Much of that sound carries over to That's the Way. Could have used some more Bonham on this one.
Yeah.
Could always use some more Bonham. But Plant's vocal layers and effects nicely fill up the sound space on the hook.
It's not really anything stand out. It's a little boring.
Well, I really like the use of the effects all the way around, including the reverse reverb on the guitar at the end. Actually, I kind of like the whale mating noises too that follow each line. I thought that was a nice touch. So I'd give this one the Darius King seal of approval.
You know, this isn't one that I'd push you out of a moving car.
What the fuck is that? How do you pronounce that?
Well,
ye fucking huh.
Yeah.
So for this line dancing song, I'm not sure why they decided the only thing we needed to hear was the hi-hat, and that they should mix the vocals like a Christopher Nolan movie.
This is probably my favorite Jimmy Page acoustic riff. It's very fast, it's very tight, it's very just like... It's perfect. It is very yeehaw-ish. Kind of does get stuck in that...
I wouldn't push you out of a car.
I wouldn't either, yeah.
Yeah, it just sounds like the autism edition of That's the Way. Overall, Led Zeppelin strikes gold, not just with one of their biggest songs, but progress the sound of hard rock in this new country and folk sound. All while staying true to their heavier roots with songs like Out on the Tiles and Immigrant Song.
Solid addition in the 4-part Zeppelin series. I personally think it's probably the weakest of the 4.
That's funny, this is my second favorite Zeppelin album.
They still delivered on their sound, they still delivered on their arrangements. Great piece of music history.
The way I look at this album is kind of like a playlist within itself, so I agree that there are not many that just jump out at you. Other than, of course, Immigrant Song, holy shit. To me, this is something you got a long road trip, you put on this whole thing. When I'm playing Zeppelin 3, I'm playing all of Zeppelin 3. Sure, there are some duds like the last two and Gallows Pole, but none of them really take away from how well-rounded this whole album is as one piece. Robert Plant, I think, turns in one of his greatest vocal performances on this record, getting sky high and bringing you back down to earth with ease on songs like Since I've Been Loving You. You can almost think of this album as a playlist itself.
Not pushing you out of a moving car.